To live without limits. Your breakthrough starts here. I'm your host, Davina Shinsky. Today, we're going to talk about something that affects us in ways that we may not recognize much later in life. And that's the home we grew up in before we went to school, entered the workplace, started and built our careers, created businesses. We were learning about life from people and the environment around us. We learned what love looked like. We learned how people handled disagreements. We learned whether it was safe to express an opinion. We learned how people talked about money. We learned what success meant. We learned how mistakes were handled. We learned whether taking risks was encouraged or criticized, and we began developing beliefs about something even more important, ourselves. This is why the question I want to explore today is what happens when the lessons we learned growing up no longer serve the person you want to become, because understanding where your patterns came from is only the beginning. Personal development is about recognizing these patterns, questioning them, and deciding which ones deserve to come with you into your future. Your childhood may have helped you shape you. It doesn't have to control you. Now, for many of us, what happens? We take what we learn from our childhood into the home we create, and understanding exactly why those things have an effect on us long after we are grown. And unless we understand where it all comes from, unless we learn how to change our behavior, we will repeat all of these things over and over again. Your home was your first classroom. When you're a child, you don't have much to compare your family with. What happens in your home simply feels normal. If people communicate openly, that becomes normal. If nobody talks about feelings, that becomes normal. If mistakes are treated as opportunities to learn, you may become comfortable trying new things. But if every mistake brings criticism, embarrassment, or anger, you might learn something very different. You may learn, don't make mistakes. That lesson can follow you into adulthood. Years later, you're considering starting a business, applying for a promotion, writing a book, becoming a speaker, or trying something new, and suddenly you're afraid. You might call it fear of failure, but where did that fear begin? Maybe failure was never allowed when you were growing up. Maybe being wrong meant being criticized. Maybe taking risks was discouraged. That's why self-awareness is so important. Sometimes what we call our personality is actually a collection of behaviors we learn because they helped us function in the environment where we grew up. And once we understand that, we can begin asking, is this really who I am? Or is this something I learned? Now, this is very, very important because I can give you an example of what I went through as a child, because this shows you exactly how society and the home you grow up in can really have a negative effect on you. But the difference is what is your natural behavior pattern can either keep holding you back or you can begin to understand and change it. For one thing, I grew up in a home that was very, very negative. I had a father that physically abused because that was the home he came from. I had a mother that psychologically abused because that was the home she came from. And together, they made a very toxic family. And understanding exactly how that can truly affect someone is so important. Because I can give you two examples. I am very much a high ID, very much an introvert. My older sister is very much of a deep personality and very much of an introvert and a people pleaser. And in my case, we were both criticized, but in my case, I also experienced a lot of physical abuse simply because I tried to do things for myself and because I was so independent. And society said that if you have a disability, you do not exist. And in my sister's case, she's only deaf. And my parents felt if they put hearing aids on her and teach her to speak, she was not deaf. And then when they sent her off to deaf schools, she was shuttled from one home to another. She stayed in the school during the week, and then on weekends, she went from my grandmother to my aunts to my uncles, and she had no stable home life. And it had an adverse effect on her. Because I'm very outgoing, I found friends that I can talk to. And as an adult, as I trained in psychology and mental health, I began to understand what was going on in the home. And I learned how to stand up to my mother. Because my father passed away just as I was entering college. And in a lot of ways, my mother she was always totally dependent on him for the financial security. And she did not want to become the one handling the money. And she could never, because she grew up in a home where she was never encouraged or supported. She had no way to know how to encourage her children and was constantly being negative. And to the point that I finally told her how to tell her to go shut up because she didn't know what I could and couldn't do. And one of the reasons that I am as independent as I am today is because I did not allow them to try to control me. And there were long periods of time when I had no contact with my mother, and I was the better person for it. But because society did not make it easy for me as someone with a disability, I struggled. And that's why I always ended up having to stay in contact with my mother or anyone in my family, because had I had been able to achieve things on my own, I would have never stayed in touch with them because they were too toxic and too negative and not people I wanted to be around. Now, let's talk about the messages that we carry into adulthood. Families communicate messages in many different ways. Some are spoken directly. And you'll never be able to do that. People like us don't become successful. Money doesn't grow on trees. Stop dreaming. Be realistic. Don't make trouble. Other messages aren't spoken at all. You learn them by watching. Maybe you watched someone stay in a job they hated because they were afraid to take a chance. Maybe nobody in your family talked about money except when there wasn't enough for it. Maybe disagreement always turned into conflict. Maybe affection wasn't expressed. Maybe accomplishments were expected rather than celebrated. Or perhaps you grew up in a supportive home where independence, curiosity, and confidence were encouraged. These experiences matter too. Whatever environment you experienced, you absorbed messages from it. And these messages can become beliefs. The problem is that we don't always recognize them as beliefs. We experience them as fact. We can't do that. I'm not enough. I should ask for help. I have to make everyone happy. I can't trust people. I have to prove myself. I can't afford to take risks. And here's something important. A belief can feel true without actually being true. So here's the first reflection question. What did your childhood teach you about yourself? And then, how much of that do you still believe today? Now, let me explain to you something. I only have one, well, it's not showing up, one hand that I can use. I learned to tie my shoes myself. I learned to do many things that a lot of people have a hard time doing with one hand because I had no choice. And I had a family that was constantly, oh, you're not making that bed good enough. Oh, you're not doing this. You'll never amount to anything. You can't hold a job. It was always what I couldn't do, not what I could do. But because I had the personality that I have, and because I was very independent, it led to a lot of things. But at least I can remember as a young child saying, why me? Why me? There is a purpose for why me. And then as an adult, early in my career, I became an advocate for disability issues because I had to learn to advocate for myself, for my own rights. And this is why it is so important for you to understand who you are, what your true personality is. Because if you're an introvert, then you're going to go along with what people tell you to do and you're going to buy into it. And what happened to my older sister is that she became very, very dependent on my mother. And then my mother passed away. In a couple of months, it'll be 15 years. And my sister has become very, very dependent on others. At one time, she tried to cook, but because they constantly criticized her and it was never ready, because she didn't know and they never really taught her how to cook. And these are just basics that she can't do for herself. It's like if you don't tell her to go take a bath, she will never bathe herself. And part of that's depression. But that depression has to do with the fact that they constantly put her down and made her feel helpless and made her feel like she couldn't do anything, always telling her what she couldn't do instead of trying to give her encouragement, give her an opportunity to hold a job, to earn and make a living, because my mother only wanted her on disability so she can continue to get that money, and constantly belittled her and made her feel helpless to the point that she does not know how to take care of herself. As we grow up at different stages in our life, it is very important that we learned at at a specific age, more and more responsibility. When a baby is an infant, when it's a toddler, they very, very dependent on you. But as they get older, as they go to school, as they start experiencing things, giving them more and more responsibility helps them to become more well-rounded as an adult. So when childhood patterns become adult habits, let's look at how some of these patterns can show up later. Suppose you grew up in an environment where keeping everyone happy kept the peace. As an adult, you may become a people pleaser. You have trouble saying no. You take on too much. You put everyone else's needs ahead of your own. And eventually, you become exhausted or resentful, or maybe you grew up constantly being criticized. As an adult, you become a perfectionist. You spend hours making something perfect because somewhere hidden inside you, you're trying to protect yourself from criticism. Maybe you procrastinate because if you never finish something, nobody can judge the finished product. Or maybe you grew up feeling like you had to prove yourself. Now you're extremely driven. From the outside, that may look like ambition. But inside, you may never feel like you're accomplished enough. There's always another achievement, another goal, another person whose approval you're trying to earn. That's why personal development isn't simply about adding positive habits. Sometimes it's about understanding why you develop the habits you already have, the inner voice you didn't choose. Pay attention to the way you talk to yourself when something goes wrong. You make a mistake. What's your immediate reaction? That didn't work. What can I learn? Or you're so stupid. You always mess things up. You should have known better. You'll never succeed. Where did that voice come from? Sometimes our inner critic sounds remarkably similar to someone from our past. We internalize messages. Eventually, nobody has to criticize us because we've learned how to do it ourselves. This is where breaking old bonds begins, not by pretending the past didn't happen, not by blaming everyone for everything that's wrong today, but by recognizing that voice may have been given to me, but I don't have to keep repeating it. By replacing it with, I failed, with something I tried didn't work. Instead of, I'm terrible at this, try, I'm still learning how to do this. Instead of, I'll never change, try, I've behaved this way for a long time, but behavior can change. That's not pretending everything is wonderful. It's learning to speak to yourself in a way that surprises growth instead of reinforcing old limitations. You can love people and still reject their beliefs. Here's something that can be difficult to accept. Breaking free from family patterns doesn't necessarily mean rejecting your family. You can love someone without adopting their beliefs. You can respect someone while choosing a different path. Maybe your family believes security meant staying in the same job for 40 years. You may decide entrepreneurship is right for you. Maybe your family believed talking about problems was inappropriate. You may decide communication is important. Maybe your family never talked about personal development. You may decide growth is one of your highest priorities. Choosing differently isn't automatically disrespectful, it's growth. Every generation has the opportunity to examine what is inherited. Some things are worth keeping: traditions, values, work ethic, humor, resilience, family stories. Other things may need to end with you: fear, constant criticism, poor communication, unhealthy boundaries, limiting beliefs, silence around important issues. Ask yourself, what do I want to carry forward? And what needs to stop with me? These are powerful personal development questions. Now, understanding that we can change our behavior, but we need to understand exactly why and how these things happen. And in order to do so, you need to understand exactly why you behave the way you do and how you can change that to be something much, much better in who you are and how you relate to what is going on. This is we need to look at breaking the need for approval. One of the strongest bonds that we carry is that from childhood to the desire behavior for approval. When we're young, approval matters. When we want parents, teachers, and other adults to tell us we're doing well, but sometimes we carry that need into adulthood. Before making a decision, we wonder, what will they think? What if they don't approve? What if they think I'm making a mistake? What if they criticize me? Here's something we eventually have to learn. Not everyone has to understand your life for you to live it. If you constantly waiting for approval, you're giving someone else enormous influence over your choices. This doesn't mean ignoring good advice. It doesn't mean refusing to listen. It means understanding the difference between considering someone else's opinion and needing someone's permission. You're allowed to make decisions other people wouldn't make. You're allowed to build a life that looks different from the one you imagined for yourself. Boundaries are part of your personal development. Breaking old patterns often requires boundaries, and boundaries are frequently misunderstood. A boundary isn't you have to behave this the way you want. A boundary is this is what I will and will not participate in. Maybe someone constantly criticizes your goals. You don't necessarily have to convince them you're right. You can stop discussing your goals with them. Maybe someone expects immediate access to your time. You can decide when you're available. Maybe conversations regularly become disrespectful. You can decide to end the conversation when that happens. Boundaries can be uncomfortable because when you change a pattern, other people may notice. If you've always said yes and suddenly say no, somebody may not like it. If you're always staying quietly and suddenly speak up, somebody may react. If you've always allowed certain behavior and suddenly stop participating in it, someone may accuse you of changing. And perhaps you are changing. That's the point. personal development requires change. Stop trying to change the past. There's another trap that we can fall into, trying to get people to stop people from our past that finally give us what we wanted years ago. Maybe you want an apology, recognition, approval, understanding. Maybe you want someone to finally admit you were right, but what happens if they never do? Do you remain emotionally tied to that situation forever? At some point, personal freedom may require accepting that you can't rewrite yesterday. You can't control whether another person understands your experiences, but you can decide what happens next. Instead of asking, why did this happen to me? You can begin asking, what am I going to do with what happened? That's where your power is, not in changing yesterday, in choosing tomorrow, building an identity that belongs to you. If you're no longer going to define yourself entirely by where you came from, you need to start defining yourself by where you're going. Ask yourself, who do I want to become? What do I value? What does success mean to me? What kind of relationships do I want? What do I believe about money? What do I believe about work? What do I believe about failure? What do I believe about myself? You may discover that you've never really answered this question. You've simply inherited the answers. Now you get to examine them. Maybe you were taught failure is embarrassing. You decide failure is feedback. Maybe you learned don't take risks. You decide calculated risk is part of growth. Maybe you learned don't draw attention to yourself. You decide my voice deserves to be heard. Maybe you learned success is for other people. You decide I'm capable of creating opportunities for myself. That's how you begin to creating an identity based on choice rather than conditioning. Create new evidence. Changing beliefs requires more than repeating positive statements. You need evidence. If you've always believed, I'm not capable, do something small that proves you are. If you always believed, I can't speak up, express your opinion. If you've always believed, I can't say no to one unnecessary obligation. If you've always believed, I'm not good with money, create a simple budget and follow it for the week. If you always believed, I could never start something on my own, take the first step. Every action creates evidence, and evidence begins challenging old beliefs. Eventually, your mind starts saying, maybe I'm not who I thought I was. And that's where transformation begins. The 7-day Breaking Old Patterns Challenge. I want to leave you with a challenge for the next 7 days. Identify the message. What? Write down one message from your childhood that still influences you. Maybe it's, I'm not good enough. Don't take risks. Keep everyone happy. Don't make mistakes. Day 2, question it. Ask, is this actually true? What evidence supports it? What evidence contradicts it? Now on day 3, identify the pattern. How does the belief affect your behavior today? Does it cause procrastination, perfectionism, fear, people pleasing, self-doubt. Day 4, create a new belief. Replace the old message with something more useful. Instead of, I can't make mistakes. Try, mistakes are part of learning. Day 5, take one action. Do something that supports the new belief. Make the call. Say no. Apply the opportunity. Start the project. Ask the question. Day 6, establish one boundary. Identify one place where you need a healthier boundary. Then practice it. Day 7, define who you're becoming. Complete the sequence. I am becoming someone who, and finish it honestly. Maybe I am becoming someone who trusts herself. I am becoming someone who speaks up. I am becoming someone who takes calculated risk. I am someone who doesn't need everyone else's approval. Then ask, what would that person do next? Then do it. Your beginning doesn't have to become your ending. The home you grew up in mattered. The message you received mattered. The way people treated you mattered. But understanding this isn't the past well enough that you can stop unconsciously repeating it. You can look at what you inherited and say, I'll keep this, I'll change this, and this ends with me. Maybe your past taught you resilience. Keep it. Maybe it taught you determination. Keep it. Maybe it taught you compassion. Keep it. But if it taught you that you weren't good enough, question it. If it taught you to be afraid of your own voice, challenge it. If it taught you that other people's approval determines your worth, release it. If it taught you that your future must look like your past, rewrite it. Personal development isn't about erasing where you came from. It's about deciding where you're going. It may not have chosen the environment that shaped your beginning, but as an adult, you have as much greater voice in determining what shapes your future. So here's the question I want to leave with you. What are you still carrying simply because you carried it for so long? And an even more important question, if it helps you because the person you want to be, if the answer is no, baby, it's time to put it down. Your past can be part of your story without becoming the author of your future. So I'm David Ashinsky, and you've been listening to Live Without Limits. Your breakthrough starts here.